The weight of the plates was a familiar comfort against her forearm. 3 of them, porcelain hot and perfectly balanced. Eleanor moved through the quiet afternoon lull of Vesuvio, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the polished marble. The table in the corner was her last of the lunch shift. 2 men. One, older, his face a roadmap of a life lived under a harsher sun. His shoulders slumped in a fine wool coat that seemed too heavy for him. The other was younger, though not young. He was carved from stillness, his dark suit a shadow against the white linen of the tablecloth. His eyes, the color of burnt espresso, followed her approach. They missed nothing. Eleanor set down the first plate of linguine, then the second. The scent of garlic and white wine bloomed in the air. She placed the third, a simple salad, before the older man. He had not looked up, his gaze lost somewhere in the starched white landscape of the table. A deep, weary sigh escaped him. He murmured something under his breath. It was not English. It was a river of sound from another time, a dialect thick with the dust of Sicilian hills and the salt of the Ionian Sea. A language of ghosts. Eleanor's heart gave a strange, painful lurch. It was a sound she knew from faded textbooks and crackling archival recordings. A piece of history she never expected to hear alive and breathing in a New York restaurant. She looked at the old man's tired face, at the profound loneliness in his eyes. Before thought, before caution, she answered him. Her voice was quiet, respectful. She used the same deep, formal grammar, the words shaping themselves in her mouth with an academic's precision. She told him to enjoy his meal, that she hoped the food brought him a moment of comfort. The world stopped. The old man's head snapped up. His eyes, clouded with age, were suddenly sharp, piercing. They widened, first in shock, then in a dawning, disbelieving light. He stared at her, at this large American woman with kind eyes and a soft, full face, who had just spoken the language of his long-lost childhood. But it was the other man who drew every ounce of oxygen from the air. He had not moved a single muscle. Yet the stillness that was once his posture had become something else entirely. It was a predatory vacuum. Every other sound in the restaurant, the distant clink of glasses, the murmur of the couple by the window, faded into nothing. The only thing that existed was the cold, analytical weight of his gaze. He looked from his father's stunned face to hers. And in that look, Eleanor understood she had made a terrible, irreversible mistake. She had been seen, and now she could not leave. The silence stretched, thin and sharp as a razor's edge. Her training screamed at her to smile, to ask if they needed anything else, to retreat. But her feet were rooted to the floor. The younger man, Dante, she knew his name from the reservation, slowly placed his fork down beside his untouched plate. The sound was deliberate, a final, soft click that echoed in the cathedral quiet. "Who are you?" he asked. His voice was low, a gravelly calm that was more menacing than any shout. It was not a question of her name. It was a question of her existence, of her purpose standing at his table, speaking a language she had no right to know.
"I'm Eleanor."
"I'm your waitress," she said, her own voice sounding foreign and thin. "That is not what I asked." He leaned forward just an inch, a minute shift that felt like a tectonic plate moving beneath the city. His father was still staring at her. His lips parted, muttering her words back to himself as if they were a prayer he had forgotten. I studied historical linguistics," she managed, the explanation sounding flimsy and absurd even to her own ears. "That dialect, it's a specific regional variant. I wrote my thesis on its phonetic decay." Dante's eyes narrowed. He was assessing her, peeling back the layers of her uniform, her polite customer service smile, her academic excuse. He was looking for the threat. In his world, a world she was only just beginning to comprehend existed in this very room, coincidences were weapons used by other people. "You will come with us," he said. It was not a request. It was a statement of fact, as undeniable as gravity. "I can't. I have to finish my shift," she said. The protest week, a final vestige of the normal world she had inhabited 5 minutes ago, He made a small, almost imperceptible gesture with his hand. Across the room, the manager, Mr. Salvo, who usually strutted with the false confidence of a peacock, seemed to shrink. He hurried over, his face pale. "Is everything all right, Mr. Gallo?" Salvo asked, his eyes darting nervously between Dante and Eleanor. "Eleanor's shift is over," Dante said, his gaze never leaving her face. "She is feeling unwell. I am going to see her home." Salvo nodded, a jerky, puppet-like motion. Of course. Go on home, Eleanor. Rest up." He would not meet her eyes. He was terrified. That was when the floor truly fell away. The professional world she understood, with its rules and schedules, had vanished. She was in his world now, and the rules were whatever he said they were. She thought about refusing, about making a scene. But one look at the cold certainty in Dante's face told her it would be a futile and foolish gesture. He would not be denied. She could make this easy, or she could make it difficult. The outcome would be the same. Her apron felt suddenly heavy, a costume from a life she no longer lived. She untied it, her fingers clumsy, and laid it on a nearby service stand. The walk out of the restaurant was the longest of her life. She was acutely aware of Dante behind her, his presence a physical pressure at her back, not touching but guiding her all the same. His father followed, his steps shuffling but quicker now, his eyes still fixed on her with a strange, hopeful intensity. The other patrons watched, their faces carefully blank. They all knew who he was, and they knew better than to be curious. The car waiting at the curb was a black sedan, so polished it reflected the gray sky like a dark mirror. A man in a suit held the back door open. Dante gestured for her to get in. She hesitated for a fraction of a second. This was the moment, the last chance to turn back. But there was nowhere to turn. He had severed her from her reality with a few quiet words. Therefore, the only path was forward, into the tinted darkness of the car. She slid onto the cool leather seat. The old man got in on the other side. Dante followed, and the door closed with a solid, final thud, sealing her inside with the silence and the scent of expensive leather and something else. Something clean and cold like steel. The car pulled away from the curb, and she watched the familiar facade of Vesuvio recede, a place of work that had become the border between her old life and whatever this was. She had believed she was just a waitress, serving lunch to a powerful man. But she had spoken the wrong words to the right person, and now her life was no longer her own. They drove in silence for what felt like an eternity. The city blurred past the windows, a smear of yellow cabs and hurried pedestrians. Eleanor kept her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. She focused on her breathing, a steady in and out that was the only calm thing in her universe. Dante did not look at her. He stared straight ahead, his profile sharp and unforgiving. His father, however, kept stealing glances at her, a quiet wonder in his gaze. Finally, the old man spoke, his voice raspy with disuse. He used the dialect again, his words soft. He asked her where she had learned the tongue of his mother. Eleanor answered in the same language, explaining again about her studies, about the university archives and the dusty books. She told him she had spent years tracing the roots of his language, a beautiful, dying thing. She had never imagined she would speak it with a living person. As she spoke, she could feel Dante's attention shift. He was listening, not just to the words, but to the cadence, the perfect, unaccented flow of it. He was a collector of information, and she was an anomaly he could not categorize. The car stopped not in front of a residence, but in a sterile underground garage. Another man opened the door. Dante got out first, then turned and looked at her, his hand implicitly waiting to help her out. She ignored it, exiting the car on her own. She was his captive, but she would not be his charge. He led them to a private elevator that opened directly into a sprawling apartment. It was a space of minimalist austerity, all glass and steel and shades of gray. It was less a home and more a fortress, perched high above the city. There were no photographs, no personal trinketses, nothing to suggest a life lived, only a life managed. Sit, Dante commanded, gesturing to a low-slung leather sofa. Eleanor sat. His father, whose name she learned was Angelo, settled into an armchair, his gaze still fixed on her. Dante remained standing, a sentinel in his own sterile kingdom. My father has not spoken more than 5 words in a month, Dante said, his English a stark contrast to the soft, rolling sounds of the Sicilian they had spoken in the car. He has periods of confusion. He retreats into the past, into a place none of us can follow. Eleanor looked at Angelo. She saw the fog of age in his eyes, but she also saw the sharp intelligence that lay beneath it, a fire banked but not extinguished. He was lonely. It was a loneliness so profound it had swallowed his words. The doctors say it is dementia, Dante continued, his voice devoid of emotion. They give him pills. The pills do nothing. He doesn't sound confused to me, Eleanor said quietly. He sounds like a man who is homesick for a home that doesn't exist anymore. Dante's jaw tightened. It was the first crack in his marble facade. She had given a name to his father's sorrow, a name that had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with the heart. A name he, with all his power and all his resources, could not fight. You will stay here, he said. The words hung in the air, cold and absolute. I have a life, an apartment, a job. You had a job, he corrected her smoothly. Mr. Salvo has already filled your position. Your final paycheck will be delivered. As for your apartment, my men will collect your things. You will want for nothing here. I don't want anything from you, she said, her voice rising slightly. I want to go home. You revealed a vulnerability, he stated, as if explaining a simple business transaction. You spoke to my father in a way that no one else can. My enemies are watching. They look for any weakness, any crack in the foundation. Your unusual skill, overheard by the wrong person, could be twisted, used. You could be a target, or you could be perceived as an asset of mine they wish to acquire. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. By speaking, you made yourself a part of this world. Therefore, you will be protected, whether you want it or not. She saw the cold, inescapable logic of it. In his world, protection was a cage, gilded and secure. Her knowledge, once a source of academic pride, had become a liability. Because she could speak to his father, she was now a strategic piece on a board she never asked to play on. She was valuable, and in Dante Gallo's world, what was valuable was owned. Over the next few days, Eleanor's life found a new, strange rhythm. She lived in a guest suite that was larger than her entire apartment, with a view of the city that was both breathtaking and isolating. Dante's men were silent shadows, always present but never intrusive. They brought her food, books, anything she asked for, except for the one thing she wanted, the key to the front door. Her time was spent mostly with Angelo. The old man, in her presence, began to unfurl. He would sit with her for hours in the stark living room, telling her stories of his village, of the brother he lost in the war, of the wife he had loved. He spoke only in his native tongue, and Eleanor would listen, responding in kind, her academic knowledge of the language deepening into a real, living fluency. She was no longer a linguist studying a dead dialect. She was a keeper of a dying man's memory. She saw the change in him. The fog in his eyes receded. He ate more. He even smiled, a rare, fragile thing that cracked the weathered surface of his face. And through it all, Dante watched. He would stand in the doorway for long moments, silent and unreadable, observing her with his father. He never joined their conversations, but he was always there, a dark, brooding presence on the periphery. One evening, she was helping Angelo with a book of old photographs, the black and white images faded and worn. He was pointing to a stern-looking young man with familiar dark eyes. That was my oldest son, Angelo said softly in Sicilian.
Marco.
He was fierce, like Dante, but he trusted too easily. A shadow passed over his face, a deep, ancient grief. He brought a man into our family, vouched for him, and that man put a bullet in his heart. Eleanor felt a chill go through her. This was the wound. The source of the coldness in Dante, the reason for his absolute control. He was living in the shadow of his brother's failed trust. Dante was there, Angelo whispered, his voice barely audible. He blames himself. He thinks if he had been faster, stronger, he carries it. Every day. Later that night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She walked into the main living area. The city lights a cold fire outside the massive windows. Dante was there, standing by the glass, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. "He speaks of you," Dante said without turning. "He says you are a kind woman." "He misses his home," she replied, stopping a few feet away from him. "His home is gone. The village is a ruin. The people are ghosts. But it's alive for him when we talk," she insisted. "It's real." He turned then, his eyes dark and heavy with things she could only guess at. "You have given him a comfort I could not." There was no gratitude in his voice, only a flat statement of fact. But it was an admission, a concession. "The Falcone family. They are the ones who backed the man who killed my brother. They are making noise again. They see my father's age as a sign of my weakness." "And what do they see me as?" she asked, the question hanging in the air. He took a step closer. The air between them crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with her captivity and everything to do with their proximity. He smelled of sandalwood and whiskey. "A complication," he said, his voice a low murmur. "But perhaps a necessary one." He reached out, his fingers lightly brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was feather-light, yet it seared her skin. It was the first time he had touched her. A small, almost deniable gesture of something that was not control, but something more complex. Something dangerously close to tenderness. The ground had shifted. She was no longer just a prisoner or an asset. She was becoming something else to him, something he had not anticipated. And in his world, the unexpected was always the most dangerous thing of all. The call came 2 days later. Dante was out, a rare occurrence. Eleanor was sitting with Angelo in a small, sunlit room he used as a library, surrounded by the smell of old paper and leather. One of Dante's men, a quiet, broad-shouldered man named Leo, entered the room, a cordless phone held out to her. His face was grim. "It's for you," he said. Eleanor's blood ran cold. No one had this number. No one even knew where she was. She took the phone, her hand trembling slightly. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was smooth, laced with a false congeniality. "Eleanor, we haven't been properly introduced. My name is Rico Falcone." Her breath hitched. Falcone. The name Angelo had whispered with such grief. "I understand you've become quite the companion to the old man," the voice continued. "A real talent with languages, I hear. Dante Gallo is a very careful man. He doesn't let people in. For him to bring you into his home, you must be very special." "What do you want?" she asked, her voice tight. "I want to send a message to Dante, a reminder that nothing is truly safe. Not his territory, not his business, not even the ghosts he keeps locked away in his penthouse." There was a pause. "We know about your walks, the small garden on the roof. Tomorrow at noon, be there, alone. Or we will visit Angelo when you are not there to speak his language to him." The line went dead. Eleanor stood frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear. It was a direct threat. They were not just targeting Dante anymore. They were targeting her. They were using her connection to Angelo as a weapon. She looked over at the old man, who was dozing lightly in his chair, a look of peace on his face she had not seen when she first arrived. They would shatter that peace. They would use his fragility to break his son. She had a choice. She could tell Leo, tell Dante's security. They would lock the place down, and she and Angelo would become prisoners in an even smaller cage. Or she could go. She could face this herself. Her professional life had been about structure and predictable outcomes. This world was the opposite. It demanded action in the face of chaos. It was what Dante did. He moved toward the threat. She told herself it was to protect Angelo. But a deeper, more honest truth echoed in the quiet of her heart. She was doing it for Dante. She would not be the weakness his enemies thought she was. That night, when Dante returned, she said nothing of the call. He found her in the library, a book open in her lap, though she hadn't read a single word. He stood in the doorway watching her. "You are quiet tonight," he observed. "Just thinking," she said, not looking up. He walked into the room and stopped in front of her chair. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "You are not a prisoner here, Eleanor." She finally met his gaze. "Aren't I?" "A prisoner would try to escape," he said, his voice a low growl. "You have not. You stay. You care for my father. You do it with purpose." He knelt down in front of her, a startling move that brought them eye to eye. The gesture was one of supplication, yet he radiated absolute power. "I have not known a woman like you. You do not flinch. You do not flatter. You simply are." It was the most honest thing he had ever said to her. It was not a declaration of love. It was something more dangerous. It was a confession of sight. He saw her, all of her, the quiet academic, the competent waitress, the woman who could stand in the heart of his violent world and not shatter. "Stay," he said, the word a command, a plea, a statement of fact all at once. She did not answer with words. She simply held his intense gaze. In the silence, she made her decision. She would go to the roof tomorrow. She would face Rico Falcone. She would protect this fragile peace, this strange, violent family she had fallen into. And she would do it not because she was forced, but because she had chosen. That silence was her confession. She stayed. He did not ask again, and she did not explain. They both knew a line had been crossed. She thought this choice, this unspoken allegiance, would make her safer. But the cost of entering his world was far higher than she could ever have imagined. The next day, at 5 minutes to noon, Eleanor made her way to the roof. The garden was a small square of impossible green, an oasis of manicured shrubs and stone benches surrounded by the concrete and steel canyons of the city. The air was cool, the sky a hazy white. She walked to the center and waited, her heart a heavy, rhythmic drum against her ribs. He did not keep her waiting long. Rico Falcone was smaller than she expected, dressed in a suit that was too flashy, his smile too wide. He was flanked by 2 large, silent men. "Eleanor," he said, spreading his hands in a gesture of welcome. "I'm so glad you came. It shows you are a sensible woman." "I'm here," she said, her voice steady. "What is your message for Dante?" Rico's smile tightened. "The message is you. He keeps you here, next to his father. A soft American woman who reminds the old man of home. It's a beautiful story, but it's a weakness, a vulnerability I can press. Anytime I want." He took a step closer. "I want his port territory in Red Hook. He will sign it over to my family. You will convince him it is the only way to keep his father safe. The only way to keep you safe." "He will never do that," she said. "Oh, I think he will," Rico sneered. "He already lost a brother because he trusted the wrong person. He won't risk losing his father because he failed to protect the woman who gives him peace." He gestured to one of his men. "Perhaps a demonstration is in order. To show you how serious we are." The man started toward her. Eleanor's mind raced. There was no escape. They were 3, she was 1. But she was not a fighter. She was a thinker. She backed away slowly, her eyes darting around the rooftop. Her gaze landed on a heavy, stone birdbath near the edge. An idea, desperate and insane, sparked in her mind. Just as the man reached for her, a voice cut through the air, cold and lethal. "That's far enough, Dante." He stepped out from behind a large stone planter, a dark silhouette against the bright sky. He was not alone. Leo and 2 other men moved with him, their movements silent and fluid. They held weapons, their professionalism a stark contrast to the thuggish menace of Falcone's men. Rico Falcone's face paled. "Gallo, this is a private conversation." "You are on my roof," Dante said, his voice deceptively calm. Nothing here is private. He took a step forward. His eyes locked on Rico, but Eleanor knew his focus was entirely on her. You threatened her. You threatened my father. You did this to force my hand. It's just business, Rico stammered, taking a step back. You made it personal? Dante replied, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than a roar. And I always finish what is personal. What happened next was a blur of brutal, efficient violence. It was not a fight. It was a surgical removal. Dante's men moved like a single organism, disarming and neutralizing Falcone's thugs in seconds. Dante himself walked directly to Rico, who was fumbling to draw a weapon. Dante's hand shot out, grabbing Rico's wrist with a crack of bone that made Eleanor flinch. He twisted, and the gun clattered to the stone floor. With his other hand, Dante struck Rico once, a single, precise blow to the throat. Rico crumpled, gasping and choking. Dante stood over him, his chest rising and falling slowly. He looked at the wheezing man on the ground with utter contempt. Then, his eyes lifted and found Eleanor's. The raw, unrestrained violence in them was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. He had shown her exactly who he was. Killer. A man who solved his problems with absolute finality. He walked over to her, stopping just inches away. He scanned her from head to toe, checking for any injury. Did he touch you? No, she whispered. He reached out and tucked a piece of hair behind her ear, his fingers surprisingly gentle against her skin. You should have told me. You would have locked me away, she said. I am not your weakness, Dante. A flicker of something, surprise, respect, something she couldn't name, passed through his eyes. He looked past her, at the city sprawling below them, then back at her. No, he said, his voice rough. You are not. He took her hand, his grip firm and possessive. Come? This is over. Cost had been paid. The tentative peace between the families was shattered. A war was coming. But as Dante led her away from the scene, his hand holding hers, Eleanor did not feel fear. She felt a strange, terrifying sense of belonging. She had seen the monster and she had not run. In the quiet aftermath, she sat with Angelo in the library. The old man was agitated, sensing the tension that now permeated the penthouse. She spoke to him in the soft cadences of his youth, her voice a soothing balm, telling him a simple story about a fisherman and the sea. Dante stood in the doorway watching them. The violence of the rooftop was gone, replaced by his usual guarded stillness. But something was different. The space between them had changed. It was no longer a distance of captor and captive. It was something else, a silent acknowledgement of a shared survival. He was her protector, and she, in her own quiet way, had become his. Her choice was made not in words but in the simple, profound act of staying. She looked up and met his gaze across the room. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was not a promise of safety or a declaration of love. It was a statement of fact. She was his, and in this brutal, unforgiving world, that was the only truth that mattered.